Sometimes the loudest lessons come not from raised voices or broken promises, but from silence. The kind of silence that enters your life only after you've betrayed someone who once would have gone to war for your peace. When a loyal person is betrayed, their response is often not dramatic or loud, but silent and deeply introspective. This silence is not born of helplessness. Rather, it is a conscious retreat, a withdrawal that becomes more revealing than any argument or confrontation. The loyal person does not seek to convince the betrayer of their wrong. They understand, either intuitively or through experience, that some truths cannot be taught through words. They must be realized through reflection. This is why the loyal individual steps back, often without explanation. In that space left behind, the betrayer is left to face the reality of their actions, without the distraction of defense or counterattack. The void left by the loyal person becomes a mirror, a psychological container into which the betrayer must gaze. In this mirror, the betrayer begins to see not only what they did, but who they are becoming. There is no longer someone there to affirm, to absorb, or to forgive immediately. The loyal person's withdrawal removes the emotional shield behind which the betrayer once hid. That silence becomes fertile ground for guilt, for remorse, and ultimately for recognition. It is not a punishment, but a revelation. The betrayer begins to feel the weight of the absence, a weight that cannot be lifted through apologies or rationalizations, but only through true self-confrontation. What makes this process so impactful is that the loyal person does not interfere. They do not explain, justify, or lash out. Their absence leaves the betrayer alone with their own conscience, and because that conscience was once softened or even soothed by the presence of the loyal person, its reawakening is painful. The betrayer begins to recall the quiet acts of loyalty, the unseen sacrifices, the moments of trust that were given freely. Each memory becomes a shard of truth, piercing the illusion they held about the other person being easily replaceable or easily forgotten. This silence becomes a form of communication more profound than words. It says, "I will not fight for what should have never been at risk." The loyal person doesn't seek to make the betrayer understand. They allow life, time, and inner reckoning to do that. Their withdrawal is not an abandonment of the relationship alone. It is a return to themselves, and in doing so, they place the full responsibility for the fracture exactly where it belongs, on the betrayer, on the betrayer, Sansky. Eventually, what haunts the betrayer is not what was said in anger or sadness, but what was left unsaid. The loyal person becomes unforgettable not because of any final speech, but because of the deep and dignified silence they leave behind. This absence forces the betrayer to wrestle with questions they cannot easily answer, and through this mirror of silence, the loyal individual, without a single word, teaches the most enduring lesson: that loyalty once broken cannot be demanded again, only remembered, and that memory lingers in the quiet more than any noise ever could. The absence of a loyal person after betrayal holds a strange and haunting power that far exceeds the influence they once had in your presence. When someone loyal walks away silently, it is not just their voice or companionship that is lost. It is their essence, the emotional sanctuary they provided, and the unspoken security they offered. You do not immediately realize the depth of what has vanished, because their loyalty was never loud or self-promoting. It was quiet, consistent, and often taken for granted. But once it's gone, the emptiness left behind becomes impossible to ignore. What was once familiar now echoes with silence, and that silence becomes a powerful force. More instructive than words, more punishing than confrontation. The presence of a loyal person is often a stabilizing force, even if unacknowledged. They are the ones who listened without judgment, stood by you in your contradictions, forgave quietly, and gave more than they took. Their presence brought emotional grounding. It created a space where you could be seen without having to perform. But betrayal changes that dynamic. It desecrates that safe space. And once violated, the loyal person does not plead, argue, or beg for your recognition. They remove themselves completely, and with that, they remove everything they were silently holding together. In that absence, you begin to feel the disintegration of what was once invisible but vital. You start noticing that no one checks in without expectation, that laughter doesn't feel the same when not shared with someone who knew your vulnerabilities. The comfort of being understood without speaking, a rare gift, is no longer available. And slowly you start to feel the weight of what was lost, not because it shouted its value when it was there, but precisely because it didn't need to. This is the paradox. The loyal person teaches you the depth of their worth only after they're gone. Their absence is not passive. It activates memory, reflection, and regret. Every space they once occupied, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, now demands to be reckoned with. You replay past moments, trying to find the precise point where trust was broken, where loyalty was dismissed, where your own actions became the cause of their disappearance. And yet, no matter how much you try to go back, you cannot summon their presence with remorse alone. The absence holds you accountable in a way that arguments never could. The loyal person's departure becomes a kind of psychological ghost. They don't haunt you through anger or blame, but through the sudden void they leave behind. You realize their presence was not just something you enjoyed, it was something you needed, but never earned back. Their silent withdrawal becomes a mirror reflecting not only their value, but your loss, your misjudgment, your betrayal. And in this quiet space, your own mind becomes the voice you tried to avoid. The power of their absence now speaks volumes, more forcefully and lastingly than their presence ever needed to. Betrayal is rarely a simple act. On the surface, it may appear to be a decision made in the moment, an impulse, a mistake, a lapse in judgment. But psychologically, betrayal is often the result of a deeper, unconscious process where the betrayer projects parts of themselves onto the person they ultimately hurt. The loyal person in this context becomes a screen for the betrayer's unresolved fears, insecurities, and internal conflicts. They are not simply betrayed because of something they did wrong, but because of the disquiet the betrayer feels within themselves, something they cannot face. So they cast it outward onto someone who feels safe, consistent, and undeservingly familiar. In many cases, the loyal person is seen as too good, too dependable, too emotionally available. These traits, instead of being honored, can trigger something uncomfortable in someone who has not developed a secure relationship with themselves. The loyal person reminds the betrayer of a form of love or commitment they do not believe they deserve. Their consistent presence begins to highlight the betrayer's own instability or fear of vulnerability. Rather than confront these inner wounds, the betrayer distances themselves through acts of deception, sabotage, or betrayal. They may not even fully understand why they are doing it. The act itself becomes a form of unconscious rebellion against the closeness and accountability that true loyalty demands. This projection often happens silently. The loyal person becomes burdened with the emotional baggage of the other without knowing why. Their affection may be met with coldness, their honesty with suspicion, their consistency with avoidance. The betrayer begins to distort the loyal person's intentions, interpreting kindness as weakness, availability as clinginess, or loyalty as control. In truth, These distorted interpretations are not about the loyal person at all. They are the betrayer's own shadow aspects being externalized. The loyal person unintentionally becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the betrayer sees all the parts of themselves they have refused to face. When the betrayal finally occurs, it often has less to do with the loyal person's actions and more to do with the betrayer's inability to sit with the discomfort of being truly seen. Betraying the loyal person then becomes a misguided attempt to regain control over their own fears, but instead of control, they are left with guilt, confusion, and a deeper disconnection from themselves. The projection doesn't resolve their inner conflict, it amplifies it. The loyal person's quiet disappearance forces them to sit with the consequences of that projection. There's no one left to carry the weight. The image they cast upon another shatters, and all they are left with is their unfiltered self. Betrayal reveals more about the betrayer than the one betrayed. It shows how unresolved parts of the psyche, if left unexamined, can distort love, damage trust, and destroy what the conscious mind claims to value. And the one who is most loyal becomes the unwilling witness of someone else's inner war. Loyalty is often misunderstood in modern relationships. Many perceive it as a transaction, something offered in exchange for attention, affection, or security. But true loyalty does not arise from fear of loss or need for validation. It comes from a deep internal principle, a moral code that guides a person to remain steadfast, even in moments of uncertainty. A loyal person does not measure their devotion by how much they receive. Their commitment is not conditional. It is rooted in character, not convenience. Their loyalty reflects who they are, not who the other person is in any given moment. That is what makes it sacred, and why its betrayal cuts so profoundly. When someone loyal is betrayed, what has been damaged is not merely the emotional connection. It is the spiritual agreement, the silent promise that their loyalty would not be misused. They gave themselves fully, not to manipulate or control, but because they believed in something greater than temporary desire. They believed in trust, in the value of presence, and in the unspoken understanding that loyalty is a form of love that does not falter when things become difficult. Betrayal violates this sacred ground. It turns what was whole into something fragmented, something profaned. The loyal person often expects nothing more than honesty and mutual respect. They are not easily swayed by superficial charm or fleeting excitement. Their depth of connection goes beyond surface appearances. They are the kind who see your wounds and do not run, who witness your flaws and remain. But when they are betrayed, it is not just disappointment they feel. It is a deep rupture in the soul. Because what they offered was never casual, it was never performative. It came from a place of vulnerability, a place where they had entrusted you not just with their emotions, but with the very foundation of how they love. To betray that is not merely to lie or to cheat, it is to desecrate something sacred. It reveals that the betrayer saw the relationship as a convenience, something to take from rather than honor. And that realization is often more painful than the act itself. The loyal person may not fight back with accusations or demands. They often choose to walk away quietly. But their silence carries the weight of the broken covenant. It reminds the betrayer that what was destroyed cannot be rebuilt with apologies, because it was not built on words to begin with. It was built on something wordless, pure, and deeply human. In a world that treats connection as a game or a strategy, the loyal person is a rarity. Their betrayal becomes a spiritual wound, not just for them, but for the one who failed to recognize the value of what was given freely. And in that failure, something irreplaceable is lost, not just the person, but the possibility of ever being loved in that way again. The sacred is never easily restored once it is broken by disregard. Non-reaction in the face of betrayal is often misunderstood as indifference or weakness, but it is in truth a profound expression of emotional mastery. A loyal person, when betrayed, does not always lash out or seek revenge. Instead, they exercise a deeper wisdom by refusing to engage in reactive cycles that only feed the drama and distort the truth. Their silence is not born of powerlessness. It is chosen. It is an act of self-respect, a boundary drawn not to punish, but to protect the sanctity of their own integrity. In choosing not to react, they demonstrate control over their inner world, a kind of psychological discipline that many lack. Reaction is instinctive. When hurt, the natural impulse is to defend, to explain, to retaliate. But these responses often stem from a desire to be understood or validated by the very person who violated trust. The loyal individual, however, recognizes that this kind of validation is empty. They understand that someone who has already crossed the line is not likely to grasp the depth of the pain they've caused through mere argument. So rather than expend energy in proving their worth or the injustice they've suffered, they conserve it. They step back, not to avoid conflict, but to deny it the attention it seeks. This form of silence becomes a powerful contrast to the noise of betrayal. Where the betrayer expects emotional chaos, they are met with composure. Where they anticipate confrontation, they encounter distance. This unsettles them, because the lack of reaction removes the opportunity for control or justification. Without a visible response, they are left alone with the reality of what they've done. The loyal person's restraint becomes a mirror in which the betrayer must face themselves. It is in that stillness that the true weight of their actions becomes unavoidable. The loyal individual's refusal to engage in petty revenge or emotional outbursts signals something deeply unsettling to the one who betrayed them, that their approval is no longer needed, their presence no longer required. That is perhaps the most powerful message silence can send, that the loyal person has withdrawn not out of pain alone, but because they have reclaimed their own dignity. The decision not to respond becomes an act of liberation. It marks a shift from the external to the internal, from dependence on others' behavior to reliance on one's own truth. Through this, the loyal person teaches a lesson more enduring than any confrontation ever could. Their silence speaks of strength that cannot be manipulated. It shows that love and loyalty, when true, are never desperate. They do not beg, they do not chase, they do not scream. They simply exit, and in doing so, they dismantle the power of betrayal, not through revenge, but through their absence. The betrayer is left with a void that no apology can fill, a quiet that echoes louder than any shouted word. In that silence, the loyal person's message becomes undeniable. I am not yours to break. When a loyal person leaves in silence after betrayal, their absence lingers not just in physical space, but in the psychological atmosphere of the betrayer's life. This silence becomes a form of presence, paradoxical yet inescapable. It is not the kind of absence that fades with time, but one that sharpens with memory. Because loyalty, when genuine, leaves an imprint. The loyal person does not just participate in your life, they inhabit it with care, with constancy, with emotional attentiveness. Their presence becomes woven into your inner world, even when unnoticed. But once they are gone, truly gone, that imprint does not disappear. It becomes a haunting echo of what was once steady and now is lost. The human psyche is shaped not only by experiences, but by the relationships that hold emotional gravity. A loyal person holds that gravity by offering unconditional regard, quiet understanding, and emotional presence that does not demand repayment. These are not qualities easily replaced, so when betrayal occurs, and that person removes themselves without spectacle, the silence that follows is not empty, it is full of what was once there, full of what now can no longer be retrieved. This is the haunting nature of their absence. It reminds the betrayer of everything they once had, but can no longer touch. Memories surface with a new texture, ordinary moments, glances, laughter, small acts of kindness become infused with meaning. The betrayer begins to realize that the loyal person's strength was not loud, but consistent, not controlling, but rooted. And this realization does not come at the height of conflict, but long after, in quiet spaces where the betrayer is alone with their thoughts. There, in those still hours, the loyal person's absence becomes an undeniable presence. It shapes the room, colors the past, and forces a confrontation with one's own choices. What makes this haunting so profound is that it comes without accusation. There is no voice to argue against, no anger to dismiss. The loyal person does not return to explain or condemn. They are simply gone, and in that clean break the full weight of their value is felt, not because they demand it, but because their quiet departure leaves behind a void shaped precisely by what they once gave so freely. This kind of absence is a teacher. It instructs without words. It reveals the cost of unconscious actions, not through revenge, but through irreversible loss. As time passes, the betrayer may attempt to fill that void, to replicate the bond, to find in others what was lost, but imitation cannot substitute essence, and so the absence endures. It becomes a reminder not of guilt alone, but of misrecognition, a failure to see the sacred while it was present. This realization does not arrive all at once. It grows slowly, subtly, and then all at once. Like a truth too long avoided, the loyal person's absence then transforms into a lifelong echo, not bitter, not angry, but quietly unforgettable. When you betray someone truly loyal, you do not just lose a person, you lose a mirror, a sanctuary, a quiet but powerful force that held space for your imperfections without judgment. Their absence does not punish through revenge, but teaches through reflection. The silence they leave behind becomes the loudest voice in your conscience, echoing truths you ignored and values you failed to honor. You begin to understand that loyalty is not something people owe you. It is something sacred they choose to give, and once broken, it does not return the same, if it returns at all. The loyal person doesn't teach you a lesson with anger or with words. They teach it with their absence, with their composure, with their refusal to shrink their worth to fit your betrayal. And that is a lesson that stays with you long after they're gone.